Hello and welcome to another episode of Teppou Republic. On the last episode, Yoshiuji was clearing up Suruga of the Odawara forces, trying to get them out of the way so that he could go on to attack them. Meanwhile, Tanenao was slowly advancing on Musashi, the shogunate capital, going into hiding, ready to attack it later. Back over in the west, we attacked the Satsuma Imperial Vanguard Army with a fresh Republican army. We had a slight disadvantage, but we had to stop them from reaching the capital, which appeared to be their goal. The fight was okay because our line infantry was far superior, but the enemy's heavy cavalry demolished our right flank and then came into the center to cause a fair bit of trouble. This meant the battle was fairly messy in the end, and we took heavy casualties, but the enemy was completely defeated at the same time. Then the Suwano clan were raiding into Tamba with a small army. Our new general Kunimitsu managed to stop them. Then their main force, which was coming in, was ambushed by Takahisa, meaning they couldn't link up. Luckily their main force was really weak, so the ambush went very well. We pretty much just swept them off the field, and Takahisa slaughtered their army, removing all of the threat from the Suwano, probably for a very long time. Then the Seido landed a small force in Echu, not enough to take the castle, but perhaps enough to cause some damage. We'll see where that goes later. And finally, Takayuki managed to catch up with the Hiroshima army, which has been rampaging in Harima for ages, and we're about to see him challenge them to battle. Let's continue. This is the nature of total war. Even we, citizens, merchants, farmers, even the homeless in the street, all of us are fair game in the eyes of the enemy, and perhaps even the emperor himself. They seek to break the spirit of the people, or perhaps they wish to entice our forces to fight them. Clearly neither method is working, for this strife only brings us closer together and renews our distaste for the ways of the warlords. Not even a single soldier has been redeployed in response to this daily plague of death either. But still, there isn't much happiness to be had here, even if the enemy's plan is failing. For the people, it means abandoning the coastal towns, what is left of them anyway, and becoming destitute in the countryside. This is the side of this glorious revolution that you don't read about in the city papers. People that try to rebuild and endure the hardship just find more flames at their door the next morning. I wonder what the sailors on those ships feel. Do they care about the innocent lives they're ending? I guess they wouldn't call us innocent. We're all rebels in the eyes of their god emperor. Thinking about those murderers makes me want to fight them even more. These legs of mine are too old for war, but perhaps I should start training my boy to hold a rifle. Welcome back. Here are Takayuki's forces taking up a defensive position on the top of this massive hill, ready to face off against the Hiroshima army, currently standing at the bottom of the hill in the northern part of the map. You can see I'm also taking an extreme right flank position. The enemy are doing something which we haven't seen enemy forces do in a long time. They're just standing there. They're actually intending to use their defensive advantage, though they are standing at the bottom of a giant hill. Not the ideal position, but the terrain on their side of the map isn't very good, so they don't really have much more choice than that. However, I'm not really going to give up this really good defensive position that I have on top of the hill. I'm going to force the enemy to attack me, and I can do that very easily because you can see here I'm bringing in 3 regiments of Parrot guns onto the field. And once I have those guys set up, the enemy will realize they have a massive disadvantage at long range and will try and close in with my army, forcing them to come up onto the top of the hill and face my elite firing lines. You can see I'm forming an echelon on my right flank. I intend to surround them on the right as they come up the hill. On the extreme right, I have my United States Marines. These are the best guys in all of the Sioux armies. Super high stats. Their stats are pretty much off the charts, which we'll see in a moment. I've also put these Yariki on another hill on the extreme right with the intention of going around the back of the enemy's army if I can. So my artillery are almost set up. I'm putting them right on the edge of these trees, ready to fire out from this ridge just above the firing line, although some of them are just behind the firing line, which we'll see is actually a little bit of a problem in a moment. Once they're set up, they're ready to face off against the enemy, but of course they have really bad line of sight. They're going to have to fire over the crest of the hill and then hope that the drop of their shots makes the shells fall onto the enemy. A couple of my guns are able to do this and manage to get a few hits on the enemy's formation, and that definitely stirs them up. They start moving and start coming coming right up the hill exactly as I'd wanted them to. So my plan pretty much worked perfectly. The fact that the hill actually will shield them as they advance is a bit annoying. They're not going to take too many casualties on the way up the hill, though while they're still at the bottom, these shrapnel shots coming down do extreme damage. Very good for me. But as I said, as they come up the hill, they'll actually be in range of my line infantry, but because they're behind the crest of the hill, they won't take many shots. So they're actually going to come into range quite close, which is good for their melee-orientated army. Seeing that it looked like they were just going to attack my centre, I started folding the right echelon a little bit more. I actually folded it too far in my own opinion. You can see I've made a pretty much 90-degree angle so that I have some line of sight coming into the centre once the enemy reach the top of the hill. The rest of my guys are just going to stand there, did a little bit of rearranging. You can see I have a big problem now from those guys who are behind my line because they start inflicting friendly fire damage. They fire right into the back of the carbine infantry standing in front of them. I was not very impressed when I saw this. I assumed that the fire at will AI didn't allow units to do this, but apparently it does. I didn't want to stop firing though, so I just created a hole in the line for my guys to fire through. I was pretty confident the enemy weren't going to come and break through that hole because I'm expecting to inflict heavy casualties on them as they approach. Meanwhile, on the right flank yet again, the US Marines are now starting to fire at the enemy. Their long range and high accuracy being used to pick off these flanking units, rifle attendants here. The enemy sent some cavalry to come up this other hill and attack my own cav, but of course I just charged straight down the hill, took the charge bonus which wiped out a large number of the enemy's horsemen. Now they're locked in melee against units which have more experience than them and are simply going to be defeated. I barely lost any of my men at all fighting with this enemy equivalent unit. An excellent situation. My US Marines are now going to pound on the enemy's forces who are turning to face them. At first I thought the enemy were going to form an echelon of their own to fight with my right echelon, but actually they were forming up to fire at my cavalry. Perhaps a lower value unit, but they seem determined to get rid of it. So they've got all these regiments turning to fire at me, because while they're firing they're taking shots from the US Marines who are just sniping them, cutting them down. It's not going to be very good for their morale. My cavalry are going to have to get out of the way though, because I actually did start taking some moderate casualties in the cavalry unit since the enemy put so much fire on me. You can see the US Marines fire extremely rapidly. It takes just a couple of seconds for them to reload their guns and fire off yet another volley. So that extreme rate of fire is going to put massive pressure on the enemy's flank. My cavalry are getting out of there. A couple of the enemy's cavalry who survived are now charging to attack my US Marines, as are the enemy's left flank forces. The rest of their army is still coming up in the center, as I thought they would. And now that they're starting to come over the crest of the hill, my artillery is starting to get direct line of sight on them and finally getting some nice accurate fire on their regiments. These Ronin have really put themselves in a dangerous situation. They're getting caught in the crossfire, being shot at from the front and the side. The US Marines are cutting them down. You can see I had to bring in my own cavalry to support the Marines because those enemy Yariki were actually killing a couple of my guys, but my cavalry drove them off the field. Now I'm going to get them out of the way so my Marines can keep doing their thing. The main line is about to come into contact with the enemy. You can see they're just coming over the crest in front of them, so my guys are going to start firing. You can see the floor is already covered in my own soldiers' bodies from that artillery-friendly fire. Not very good. But still, the enemy aren't going to have much luck getting close to us because we're going to bombard them with so much fire. Plus, now the enemy are really close, I decided to load up some shrapnel into the artillery. I'm going to blast them with some accurate shrapnel fire at close range. Some of their regiments are completely decimated by this fire. This regiment on the left here, you can see it's a bunch of spear levy, and they are completely destroyed when 2 hits from shrapnel destroy their regiment. The only area where they're advancing successfully is here on my left flank. A unit of Katana Kachi was about to hit my line. I gave them a volley from my line infantry and then charged them with my spears to lock them in place. My guys are now going to try and shoot these Katana Kachi at close range and kill half of my own spears in the process, but still worth it because the spears are very replaceable, unfortunately. Now my Yariki right at the back of the line are going to do some heavy damage to the enemy's units on their left flank. I just charged them in the back and got rid of them. They're already damaged from facing off against the Marines, of course. The Marines are going to shift target to start firing at the enemy's centre, as all these other units I'm folding around. The centre is beginning to break, quite understandably, but they still have all these units around their general who are holding on. Their general started charging forward, so this is an opportunity for me to just take him out and get rid of the rest of these units, because I'm assuming it's just the general's aura which is keeping them in the battle. More fire from my gunmen and a couple of accurate artillery strikes destroy all of these units. They're getting out of here. Shrapnel cuts down the general and his men. It's a decisive victory for the Sioux forces. The Hiroshima really didn't put their melee forces to good use, coming right up the front, perhaps hoping that that hill crest would save them from being destroyed, but the gap between when they came into my line of sight and my line was just too large. So we finally wiped out the Hiroshima army, which has been quite pesky recently, damaging our infrastructure. Let's head back to the campaign map. Fighting alongside the Japanese has been a strange experience. They've got a weird combination of characteristics that make these fights as impressive as they are brutal. They love courage, valor, and tactics as much as any military folk, but at the same time they love sacrifice, struggling in the face of death and, as they say it, putting death before dishonor. The main effect of all that is that when a side loses, they really lose, and the guys on the winning side don't bat an eyelid about the slaughter, like they've been totally stripped of their humanity. It seems the requests by my CO that we take prisoners aren't gonna sink in. Here are the results. We can see we took a few hundred casualties, the enemy completely wiped out as expected. You can see that the US Marines did pretty good on the kill count, matching the artillery with their very effective flanking fire on the enemy's army. They're also now level 9, making them pretty much the most effective fighting infantry possible in the game, especially with all the upgrades. Even more good news, Takayuki levels up. Always good to have a high level daimyo in your army. Now the question for Takayuki is, can he move on to attack the nearby castle? It's got a massive garrison, only a small number of forces protecting it apart from that though, so it's certainly a possibility. We'll have to wait until next turn because we need more movement points. Back over in the east, we can see the Odawara clan has rallied together forces recently defeated by Yoshiuji and has come in to attack Tsuruga once again, of course forgetting that Yoshiuji was still hanging around, so we're now going to chase them down and wipe them out. This actually constitutes the majority of the Odawara's remaining forces, so we're just going to brush them aside with a quick auto-resolve. We have a massive advantage here, and that'll be the threat from the Odawara gone. This means that their two provinces of Sagami and Izu are now very easy for us to take if we want to. But it is a fork in the roads. We can only take one at a time, of course. I can either go south and attack Izu, or east and try to link up with Tanenao by taking Sagami and then moving on to Musashi. I decided I would rather go south for now, just get Izu off my mind, and then I can continue east with no threats from the rear. So we're going to start moving towards that province. Next turn we'll be able to attack it, and we can see just there was pretty much no forces defending it whatsoever. I was considering not bothering to bring this reinforcement group, which is full of light artillery that I don't really want, but I thought I might as well. Nothing else to do with it, might as well increase our power as we go into the attack. In nearby Musashi province, Tanenao is wishing to attack Musashi, but you can see the Edo have brought up some forces to back it up, so now there's actually a pretty substantial resisting force that will stop him from taking it. Almost a full stack of garrison troops, plus a whole bunch of regular troops hanging around outside the castle. So to attack now could be quite disastrous. You can see the Edo have brought up some pretty high level units actually, some of the best samurai units, and they're also trained up to high level. So perhaps a formidable force. I decided I'm going to remain in hiding and wait for Kodama to show up with the reinforcement army. He's leading this army, which is a mix of old style line infantry and Republican units, down to back Tanenao up, abandoning his old traditional style army back in North Shinano. So I'm going to swap him in, replacing out some of those line infantry who aren't really important, and he is going to start moving down towards Musashi. I realize I'm probably going to be best served by just positioning him in a hidden position so the enemy don't know he's there, but then using that one squad of line infantry who I detached as bait, because if I put these guys in Musashi, there's a chance the Edo forces will just come and try and attack them, and on the way they're going to be marching up a road which has two massive ambushes set up by both Tanenao and Kodama. So I was hoping that by using those line infantry as bait, I'll be able to take out some of the Edo forces before we attack the castle. That's the plan. Now moving up north to another battlefront where Takemichi is sitting in Echigo, there's a few Gonozawa forces on the way, but nothing serious. The area is pretty stable, but the main problem is the public order in the city itself. Takemichi can't move his forces out without the province falling into rebellion, so I'm going to try and work towards stabilizing the area and getting it safe enough for Takemichi to move off, because his forces are needed elsewhere. Now far to the west, I'm looking at the situation here in Tango. The enemy have moderate defences on the castle itself. I was planning to just go and attack it now, but I decided that I'd rather team up with Kunimitsu's forces, team him up with Takahisa that is, before going into the attack, just to make sure we have a giant definitive advantage and that we can hold the castle easily after taking it. Kunimitsu needs to restore some troops, so I'm going to leave him inside our borders, and Takahisa does need to restore troops as well, so I decided to pull him back for a bit. We're going to wait 1 or 2 turns, get these forces up to full strength, perhaps even reinforce them with some more units, and then go on to attack Tango. I know the Suwano can't really put any more forces into the field, so they probably won't defend this area anymore, and the Yonago are already on the back foot. If they have any more forces, they'll be elsewhere, so it should be safe to do this. I guess it's a sign of father's trust in me that he wants me to campaign against the imperial clans. You know, at first when the revolution happened, I thought he would just keep me penned up at home the whole time, knowing I wasn't really on board. But he took a chance on me and let me fight, and I guess the amount of imperial blood on my hands means I can't go back to the emperor now. Back in the day, the idea of being a rebel leader was worse than death, but now that it seems the history of this war shall be written by us, I think the effect on my honour will be overwhelmingly positive, and I know it will. Moving into the next turn, the Satsuma land another force in Harima, so it looks like my campaign westward isn't going to happen. Harima is under some real pressure there. In Musashi, the Edo forces don't really take the bait and come to attack my line infantry. Instead, they send a single geisha to go and attempt to persuade them to join their side. Luckily for me, this persuasion fails, but it does cause the army to be stopped in its tracks, so I can't move it next time. They also do move some forces from Kosuke into North Shinano, so it looks like there is going to be a little bit of an offensive by the Edo coming soon. The Seido forces who landed at Etchu move south towards Hida, just as I expected, and the Yonezawa men are still building up forces in Echigo, not actually attacking, but just moving more and more men into the province. They're also busy bombarding my coastline in Ki. In particular, Ki has been affected very heavily by coastal bombardments, as have many of the other coastal provinces, especially on the northern side of Japan, because I have no navy there to stop the enemy from doing it, and I can't build one up because the enemy simply attack any ships I build. It's very inconvenient. So let's look at the situation in Harima. The Hiroshima have appeared with another army on the border there, so it makes it even harder for me to go west, and I need to come back towards the city anyway because it's now very vulnerable to an attack by the Satsuma if they are going to go for it. But I wanted to assume that they were actually going to go east towards Setsu as they had before, because of course they already had the forces who defeated the Satsuma last time standing around there, and if I can rely on that happening, then I can put Takayuki in an ambush position near Harima, hope the Hiroshima forces go straight for the castle thinking it's undefended, and potentially get a chance to wipe them out. That's what I hope will happen anyway. We'll see what really happens as we go into the next turn. The force in Setsu, you can see here, actually does need a few more turns of regeneration before it's really at full strength, but it's probably going to take 1 or 2 turns for the Satsuma to decide what they're doing, so I should be a bit stronger by the time a fight happens, if one does happen in Setsu. Back up in Tango, you can see the situation is looking pretty favourable to me. I've got both my armies ready to attack and in striking distance of the enemy castle, so I decided to go for it. They're not quite at full strength, but they're definitely high enough in strength to take on this castle. First, I need to brush aside this random Suano officer who's just standing in front of the castle very defiantly. I needed to play about with my movement points, leave the artillery behind to engage him in battle. Now he stands his ground, which is very good because that means all of the forces inside the castle, the Yonago forces, are drawn out into a really disadvantageous battle. So I can quickly auto-resolve this, and all of those defenders inside the castle are just going to be wiped out, meaning the castle now has pretty much no one left in it to fight. So my 2 stacks are going to be able to take it very easily. Excellent news, a poor decision from the Suano, damning the Yonago to failure. This could actually be very bad for the Yonago because I can go on from this castle with these 2 stacks to attack Tajima if I want to, but actually I don't intend to because I don't want these armies to move any further west until Takayuki has secured Harima so that he can move further west on his battlefront too. Otherwise they'll be creating an unnecessary salient in the line, which will make it a little bit harder to hold my provinces, especially because the Imperial forces seem very intent on constantly counter-invading. So for now I'm going to take up a sturdy defensive position here. We'll take the castle at Tango with Takahisa's forces, and I intend to bring Kunimitsu back down into Tamba, and then perhaps move to a position where he can attack Tajima from the south once the situation allows it, or even move south himself to go into Harima and try and help out with the situation there. Kind of depends what happens with all these invasions that are constantly coming in. Now back over on the far east, you can see the Edo forces have garrisoned all of their men inside Musashi. Actually, that's a good thing. I'd rather they're inside the castle than outside, because that means when I attack, I don't have to face both them and the garrison at once, potentially anyway. So I'm going to move in and lay siege to the castle. I'm going to bring Kodama down to back up Tanenao. So we now have a pretty good army, but the enemy has a good army defending it as well, so it probably would be a bloody battle if I went into the attack. I'm using my shinobi just to check out that the Edo have no reinforcements coming, and seeing that they don't really, I'm just going to maintain the siege. There's no rush for me to take that castle. Ideally they'll come out and try and attack me, because in a field battle I'll have a giant advantage. Meanwhile, Yoshiuji is going to go on the offensive against the Odawara now that we've pretty much bashed them down to having almost no forces remaining. They do have this squad of Shogun swordsmen who decide to stand their ground outside the castle at Izu against Yoshiuji's entire army, so he sweeps them aside with no casualties, of course. And now the castle is completely open. It has a quite big garrison force inside it, but most of those units are going to be low level, rubbishy things like levy infantry. Not really enough to stop this experienced army, which has some decent units in it. I'm going to move up this little reinforcement group just to make sure we have a nice advantage over the enemy's castle, especially because that reinforcement group has tons of artillery in it. So now going into the battle, we have a pretty sizable advantage, not the biggest advantage in the world, but certainly enough to safely auto-resolve it and capture the castle without having to go through all the trouble of taking it myself. It's a heroic victory in the auto-resolve, better than expected. We still actually lost a fair few hundred men there, but I guess it's not so bad because the Odawara don't have an army of their own. We don't expect to face any significant foes in this area, so Yoshiuji is free to regenerate troops as he gradually moves towards Sagami, which will be the next target, wiping out the Odawara entirely once we capture that province, I believe. The reinforcement group, I decided I'm not going to send them with him to Sagami, or at least I'm not going to send all of them to Sagami. Some of them are going to remain around this area as garrison forces because public order isn't all that good. Now up in Echigo, which also had that public order problem, I've finally got enough men together so that I can move Takamichi out of the castle without the castle getting too angry. So I'm taking him with a nice powerful army to move south towards Kosuke. You can see I've left a good number of men in the castle to defend against the Yonezawa, who look like they're going to attack. North Shinano is similarly defended by a weird ragtag band against the Edo, who appear to be attacking, which is excellent news because it means Kosuke is going to be undefended for when Takamichi attacks. So moving on, the Satsuma Imperial Vanguard incite a rebellion in Iga, very cheeky. Then, their fleet that delivered that landing force into Harima moves to attack my raiding fleet. It looks like the enemy's fleet is a bit weaker. Its ships individually are better than mine, they're copper plated and a lot of them are high level. But they are somewhat battered from previous engagements by the looks of it. Plus, I have that classic defender's advantage. We've seen me defend this spot of ocean a couple of times before without really taking any losses, so I'm going to try and do something similar. The only difference is that the enemy has one ship coming in as reinforcements, but we'll see if that stops me from crossing the T. A letter from Takayuki. Hopefully he's answered my concerns. Well, I guess it was to be expected. I asked him why Tanenao and Harunaga are leading the attack on Edo and not me, despite my longer service and higher social standing. He tells me here that pre-revolution standing has been discounted from his mind and that now only skill and merit warrant his attention. As if that is fair when these two have had all the chances for glory they ever wanted, while I was stuck waiting for an enemy that never arrived for half of this war. Just another discourteous blow to the parts of the old order that actually made sense. It's a beautiful summer's day on the sea near Ki as my fleet takes up its formation, a big line facing off against the enemy's advanced guns ready to fire. The plan, of course, is to just sit here and allow the enemy to come into range and try and hit their leading ships with as many of my own ships as I can. The plan that I used in the previous naval battles fought in this part of the sea. The enemy are coming in a single line formation, which is absolutely perfect, exactly what I want. Their leading ship is hopefully going to be destroyed, and then the second ship will be destroyed as it comes into the same position, and that will continue until we've worked our way all the way down the enemy's line. The only possible spanner in the works was the enemy's reinforcement ship, which could have come behind me or to the side. But luckily it came right behind the enemy's advance, meaning they'll basically just come and join the queue of ships coming in to be fired at. So now we can see the first ship has come into position. A quick volley of explosive shots quickly denies them the masts from their ship. I guess they didn't need them anyway. And more importantly, it sets the ship on fire. And when these ships are on fire, the crew spend more time trying to put the fires out and generally repair the ship than they do actually firing back at me. Which means I'm pretty much not going to take any fire from the enemy during this entire battle because their ships will pretty much consistently be on fire for the whole battle. Previously I'd noticed that the enemy tried to engage with my ironclad rather than any of the other ships as they came in. This doesn't appear to be the case in this battle. They just come in and engage the center of my T crossing, which is perfect I think. I think it maximizes the number of my ships that can fire back at them. Here's the perspective from my side. We can just see a wall of enemy targets, some of them covered in fire already as the explosive shot begins to do its work. You can also see in the background there, my ships are beginning to turn weirdly at weird angles, which we'll see in a little bit more of in a moment. Now that some of the enemy ships have been destroyed, the carcasses of those ships are starting to form cover for the ships coming in behind, which we've seen happen before, and it means it slows down the process of defeating their line as it comes in, but as long as we're still defeating them, it's still okay. The enemy aren't getting close to our line at all. See, this ship here is coming in to take cover behind a dead ship. This ship coming in at the back is now ramming into one of its former allied ships. This actually works to my advantage because they have to maneuver around the ship carcasses. It slows them down, so it slows down the rate at which they're advancing to a firing position, meaning that fewer ships are in a firing position at any given time. This ship here is in total cover from the ship in front of it. It can't even be hit by my guys, but they surrender anyway because their ship's are already on fire and things aren't going too well in general. We can see half the enemy's fleet is already on fire and in danger of exploding at this point. The rest of their fleet is in some form of disarray, attempting to get through this maze of burning ships. So overall, the battle is pretty much won. Now you can see what I mentioned here about the odd angles of the ships. The momentum of firing the shots has actually turned the ships so that they're no longer facing the right direction, severely reducing my ability to fire at the enemy. Inconvenient, and I actually didn't notice during the battle because I must admit I wasn't even at the computer. I just let it play itself out, knowing I wouldn't be required to do anything for the duration of this fight. But even just having a couple of ships actually facing the enemy is enough to take out the survivors by the end of the battle. Just a couple of ships here trying to sneak their way through this graveyard of burning boats. But they're not going to have any more luck than any of their compatriots did. They'll be destroyed quite roundly. And frankly, at this point, pretty much just providing experience to my crewmen. Their target practice at this point. So you can see the entire enemy fleet was wiped out quite briefly after this. The ships that were trying to break through at the end surrendered, and rightly so. A fine decision and a fine victory for the Sioux Navy. Another decisive victory on this site. It seems that this ultimate crossing the T tactic cannot be defeated. As expected, we defeated all the enemy ships in the battle results, losing none of our own. There was no information in the unit details about which ships killed which ones, but I guess that doesn't really matter. We've gotten rid of their whole fleet, that's what's important, and our ships have leveled up without really taking any damage. I don't think the enemy even got a single shot off that I noticed, but as I said, I wasn't actually watching the battle, but I didn't see it in the replay either. Now, as the Satsuma move into Setsu, the Iwakuni appear and land a force in Harima. The situation in Harima appears to be getting worse than it was before, and then the Hiroshima invade as I expected, but don't quite get ambushed by Takayuki, unfortunately. The Edo forces don't attack me at Masashi, but they do move forces against North Shinano. Those won't be able to do very much though. The Sado forces in Hida don't move either, very interesting. Then the Yonezawa continue to build up men in Echigo and prepare to attack, not too worried about that. The only really bad situation now is that the Iga rebels are on the warpath against the castle. We've already seen this happen twice before. I think this is probably the most powerful rebel army we've seen up till this point, but it's also the most powerful set of defenders I've had available. I've recruited a bunch of low-level soldiers in this castle to maintain public order and defend against possible rebellions, thinking that it might happen again, so that turned out to be a worthy investment. Those soldiers are very low quality, but then so are the enemies, so perhaps the defender's advantage will allow us to crush them. We'll be finding out what happens next time. So that's all for this episode. We'll fight to hold Iga, advance in the east and resist invasion in the west next time on Teppou Republic.